The morning sun spilled through the window of her small apartment, lighting up the baby clothes folded neatly on the couch and the textbooks stacked on the table. She sat there quietly, her hands resting on her growing belly, lost in thought. Just months earlier, life had felt different. She had a plan. She was in college, determined to get her degree, and had always imagined walking across the stage in her cap and gown. But now, with a baby on the way, everything seemed uncertain. Questions flooded her mind. How would she balance late-night feedings with early morning classes? How would she pay for diapers and tuition at the same time? How would she keep up when so many people already doubted her? When she told people she was pregnant, the reactions weren't always kind. Some looked at her with pity, as if her dreams had just ended. Others told her to take a break, that college could wait, that her baby needed her more than her degree did. She listened politely, but deep down she knew what they didn't. She couldn't let go of her dream. She wanted her child to grow up seeing that no matter how heavy life becomes, giving up is never the answer. She wanted her child to know that hard times don't erase ambition. They shape it. At night, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about her own childhood, the sacrifices her family had made, the way her mother had pushed her to work hard in school. She didn't want to stop now. She whispered promises to her baby, telling the little one growing inside her that they would get through this together. Her degree wasn't just hers anymore, it was theirs. The semester moved forward, and so did her pregnancy. Walking across campus with her belly showing made her feel both vulnerable and powerful. Some people stared, some whispered, and some avoided eye contact. She pretended not to notice, but she felt every glance. Still, she kept her head up. Each time she sat in class with her notebooks and highlighted textbooks, she reminded herself that she had a reason bigger than judgment to keep going. Her child was already giving her strength. As the weeks passed, she had days when fear got the better of her. She wondered how she would handle finals week when her due date was near. She thought about the hospital bills and the cost of daycare she couldn't afford. She thought about the nights she would have to write essays with one hand while holding a crying newborn with the other. On those days, she wanted to curl up and let it all go. But then she would place her hand on her stomach and feel the gentle kick of her baby. That small reminder was enough to keep her moving. She worked part-time at a local cafe, standing behind the counter with swollen feet and an aching back. But she pushed through. Every dollar she earned mattered. Some customers smiled and encouraged her when they noticed her balancing work and pregnancy. Others judged quietly. She ignored the negativity because she knew people would always have something to say. What mattered was how she chose to respond. Her professors were another challenge. A few offered kindness, asking if she needed extra time for assignments or if they could help in some way. But others didn't hide their doubts. One professor even told her with a stern face that maybe college wasn't the right place for her right now. His words burned, but instead of breaking her, they fueled her determination. She didn't want to prove him wrong for his sake. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do it. At home, the apartment was small but filled with hope. She decorated a corner for the baby with a crib and soft blankets. Next to the crib sat her desk, where piles of notes and textbooks were always waiting. She pictured herself rocking her baby to sleep before turning back to her laptop to finish an essay. It wasn't the traditional image of college life, but it was her reality, and she was ready to live it. She often thought about graduation day. She imagined holding her baby close while walking across the stage, both of them dressed for the occasion. That vision played in her head like a movie, keeping her motivated on the hardest days. She didn't just want a degree. She wanted a story her child could carry forever, a story of strength, love, and never giving up. As her due date drew closer, the challenges grew heavier. Walking to class became harder. Sitting for long lectures felt unbearable, and carrying books across campus was exhausting. But every step she took reminded her that she wasn't just walking for herself. She was walking for the life she was bringing into the world. On evenings when loneliness crept in, she reminded herself she wasn't alone. Her baby was with her every moment, every class, every long shift at work. When she studied late into the night, she thought of it as studying together. When she struggled, she thought of it as teaching her baby resilience before they were even born. In those final weeks of the semester, she faced moments that tested her strength. She came close to quitting more than once, but something inside her always pulled her back. She had made a promise, and she wasn't going to break it. Even if the world doubted her, Even if exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders, she carried on. Because this was more than just finishing college. This was building a foundation for the future. And she knew with every heartbeat of the child inside her that quitting was not an option. The days after the baby was born were filled with a mixture of joy, exhaustion, and overwhelming responsibility. She had dreamed about holding her child, and now that moment was here. The first time she cradled her newborn, she felt something deep inside her shift. All of the fears she had carried for months suddenly seemed small compared to the love she felt. But alongside that, love came reality. Midnight feedings, endless diapers, and the constant cries that tested her patience and her strength. Even as she sat in the hospital bed, she thought about school. Finals were around the corner, and she wondered how she would manage them with a newborn in her arms. The thought of dropping out crossed her mind more than once, but every time she looked at her baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, she reminded herself why she had to keep going. Her degree wasn't just for her anymore. It was for the two of them. At home, life quickly turned into a balancing act. The apartment that once felt small now seemed even tighter, with baby supplies filling every corner. Bottles lined the counter, baby clothes filled the laundry basket, and textbooks still sat open on the desk waiting for her. She tried to create some order out of the chaos, but most days felt like a race she was always behind in. The nights were the hardest. The baby would wake every few hours, and she would rock the little one back to sleep, her eyes heavy with fatigue. Then, instead of lying down, she would drag herself to the desk, opening her laptop to finish an assignment or review lecture notes. Some nights she barely managed to type a single paragraph before the baby cried again. Money was another worry that never left her mind. The part-time job at the cafe wasn't enough to cover everything. She found herself cutting corners, skipping meals, and choosing the cheapest baby formula she could find. Every penny mattered. She started applying for scholarships and grants, hoping that someone out there would believe in her story enough to give her a chance. But waiting for answers took time, and in the meantime she had to make do with what little she had. There were days when she had to bring her baby with her to class. With no babysitter and no family nearby to help, she strapped the baby in a carrier and walked into lecture halls filled with curious eyes. At first, she felt embarrassed. She worried that people would complain about the baby fussing or crying during class. But soon she noticed something unexpected. While some students stared, others smiled. A few even offered to take notes for her when she had to step out to soothe her child. Slowly, she realized she wasn't completely alone. Still, there were professors who weren't so understanding. One told her bluntly that college wasn't a place for a baby, that she should take a leave of absence and come back when life was calmer. She held back tears during that conversation, nodding politely, but inside she felt her resolve harden. If she left now, she might never return. She couldn't let go of her future just because the path was harder for her than it was for others. Her close friend from class became a quiet anchor. They would study together in the library, with the baby sleeping in a stroller beside them. Sometimes her friend would rock the stroller gently while she typed away on her laptop, buying her a few more minutes of focus. Those small acts of kindness meant more than words. They reminded her that support didn't always come in big ways. Sometimes it came in small, simple gestures that helped her survive one day at a time. As the weeks passed, she grew used to her new routine, though it was far from easy. She carried diaper bags and textbooks at the same time. She read assigned chapters with one hand while holding her baby with the other. She studied in waiting rooms at the doctor's office, in the cafe during her lunch break, and late at night when the world outside her apartment was quiet. Every part of her life blended together. Motherhood and education were no longer separate, they were one. Her body was tired, her mind often clouded by lack of sleep, but her spirit kept pushing forward. She reminded herself that struggle didn't mean failure, it meant progress. Each challenge she faced and overcame built her resilience. She looked at her baby and saw more than just responsibility. She saw purpose. Every paper she turned in, every test she passed, every class she attended was a step toward a future where her child could live without the same worries she carried. There were moments of pure doubt, though times when she wondered if she was being selfish. Was she risking too much by trying to do both, being a mother and a student? Would her baby suffer because she was stretched too thin? These questions weighed heavily on her heart. But then she thought of the long-term picture. She imagined her child growing up, asking her one day how she managed to make it through. And she wanted to be able to say, "I didn't give up," even when it was hard. Her determination grew stronger with each passing month. She started organizing her life around her child's schedule. Nap times became study hours. Feeding times were followed by quick bursts of writing essays. She learned how to focus in short windows of time, something her classmates didn't have to think about. What took others 3 hours to complete, she sometimes had to finish in 30 minutes, but she learned how to make it work. Her story began to spread quietly around campus. Some students whispered about the young mom who brought her baby to class, while others admired her determination. She didn't seek attention, but she couldn't hide her reality either, and although some people still doubted her, there were more who respected her for what she was trying to do. A few professors even mentioned her dedication in private conversations, impressed by how she kept showing up despite the odds. Every night, when she finally lay down with her baby beside her, she felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. Her life wasn't easy, but it was meaningful. She was shaping not only her child's future, but her own. The struggles didn't end, they came every day in different forms. But she learned to see them differently. Each obstacle was not a reason to stop, but a reason to keep going. There were still bills to pay, still late nights of studying, still the weight of uncertainty. But she carried all of it with a quiet strength. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't pretend to be. She stumbled, she cried, she had moments of frustration and hopelessness. But she always found a way to get back up. Because for her, quitting was never truly an option. She had come too far, and there was too much at stake. As the semester continued, she realized she was no longer just surviving. She was adapting. She was learning how to navigate a life that seemed impossible to others. And though the path ahead was still long and filled with challenges, she began to believe, more than ever before, that she could finish what she started. Not just for herself, but for the little life that depended on her every step. The months went by, and the weight of everything began to press down harder on her shoulders. She had been holding on with strength that surprised even herself, but there were cracks forming. Every day seemed to demand more of her than she had to give. The baby was growing, and with growth came new challenges. The nights were still long, filled with interrupted sleep, and the days seemed even longer, packed with classes, assignments, and part-time shifts at work. Her body ached from exhaustion, and her mind often felt clouded. There were times she stared at her textbooks but couldn't absorb a single word, no matter how hard she tried. One afternoon, after dragging herself to campus with the baby in tow, she sat in class feeling completely overwhelmed. The professor was talking about material she had already read, but the words floated past her. She was too busy rocking the baby's stroller with one hand while trying to take notes with the other. A few students glanced at her with sympathetic smiles, but others looked irritated by the occasional fussing from her child. Their stares cut into her like sharp blades, making her feel like she didn't belong there. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to scream, but instead she bit her lip and kept going. That evening, after returning home, the weight of the day hit her. She placed the baby in the crib and collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she said the words out loud. "Maybe I can't do this." The sound of her own voice admitting what she feared broke her heart. She thought about how much easier it would be to just stop, to step back from college, focus only on motherhood, and let the dream of a degree fade away. She thought about how many people had told her this exact thing, and for a brief moment she believed they might be right. The breaking point came when she failed one of her exams. It wasn't that she didn't study. She had tried, but her baby had been sick that week, keeping her up for 3 nights straight. By the time she sat down to take the test, her mind was foggy, her body weak, and her focus gone. When she saw the failing grade on the paper, it felt like confirmation of her worst fears. She clutched the paper tightly, her hands shaking, her chest tight. Walking out of that classroom, she felt ashamed, defeated, and empty. She sat on a bench outside the building, staring at the paper, while students around her laughed, talked, and moved on with their day. For her, time seemed to freeze. She thought about calling it quits. The idea of packing up her books, walking away, and never looking back seemed almost like relief. But then she thought about her baby waiting at home. She thought about the little life that depended on her, the future she had promised, the vision she had held onto of walking across the stage with her child in her arms. She couldn't let go of that. Not yet. A week later, she found herself in her professor's office, holding back tears as she explained why she had struggled on the exam. She didn't expect sympathy. After all, she had been told before that college wasn't the place for someone like her. But this time the professor surprised her. Instead of dismissing her, he listened. He nodded, asked questions, and finally said something she hadn't expected. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let this one test convince you otherwise. You can recover from this." His words weren't a magic fix, but they planted a small seed of hope inside her heart. Encouragement also came from unexpected places. Her friend who studied with her reminded her of how much she had already accomplished. They told her that failing one test didn't erase the nights she stayed up studying, the mornings she showed up to class no matter how tired she was, or the sacrifices she made every single day. Slowly, she began to realize that setbacks didn't mean she was failing. It meant she was learning, adjusting and finding new ways to fight forward. She started reorganizing her life, determined to turn her struggles into something that could help her, not destroy her. She created strict routines, mapping out every hour of the day. She planned her study times around her baby's naps and feeding schedules. She found quiet corners on campus where she could sit with her child and still get work done. She discovered campus resources she hadn't used before, tutoring services, writing centers, even counseling sessions that helped her clear her mind. Slowly, she began piecing herself back together. The baby became her greatest source of motivation. Every time she looked into those innocent eyes, she felt reminded of why she was pushing so hard. She told herself that the nights of exhaustion, the tears of frustration, and the weight of doubt would all be worth it when her child grew up knowing what resilience looked like. She wanted her child to see that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up after every fall. Still, there were many nights when she sat in the dim light of her apartment, her textbooks open, her baby asleep beside her, and tears streaming down her face. She wasn't a superhero. She was human. She felt fear, loneliness, and frustration. But in those quiet moments, she also felt something else: resolve. She whispered to herself over and over again, "You can do this. You have to do this." By the middle of the semester, her grades began to rise again. She didn't suddenly have more free time, and she wasn't any less tired. But she had found ways to work smarter. She asked for help when she needed it, something she had been too proud to do before. She leaned on the support of the few people who believed in her, and she let their encouragement lift her when her own strength ran low. Slowly, she began to see progress again. The hardest part of this journey wasn't just the physical exhaustion. It was the constant battle with doubt. Doubt followed her everywhere, whispering that she wasn't enough, that she was making mistakes, that she should quit. But each time doubt tried to win, she looked at her baby and remembered why she started. And with that reminder, she pushed forward one more day. She realized something important along the way. Resilience wasn't about being fearless or perfect. It was about choosing to continue, even when the road was dark and filled with obstacles. It was about holding on to hope, even when everything around her seemed hopeless. And in that realization, she found a new kind of strength. Though the semester still had challenges ahead, she carried herself differently now. She knew setbacks would come. She knew exhaustion wouldn't vanish, but she also knew she could face them, because she had already proven to herself that even in the lowest moments she could stand up again. And for her, that was enough to keep moving forward. The seasons changed, and with each passing month she became more skilled at balancing her new life. It wasn't that things suddenly became easy. They didn't. But she started to learn how to live within the storm instead of being swept away by it. The sleepless nights were still there. The long hours of studying still weighed on her, and the baby still needed her every moment. But now she had systems, little routines that helped her keep moving without falling apart completely. She learned to study in fragments, turning small bits of free time into progress. If the baby napped for 20 minutes, she grabbed her notebook and reviewed class notes. If the baby played quietly on a blanket, she typed out part of an essay. She discovered that progress didn't always have to come in big leaps. Sometimes it was made in tiny steps that built up over time. This change in perspective gave her hope. She stopped comparing herself to her classmates who had more freedom and time. Instead, she focused only on her own path, her own pace, her own reasons for continuing. Campus life also started to feel less isolating. Some students who once only looked at her with curiosity began to admire her determination. A few even offered to help carry her books, or watch the baby for a moment while she packed up her things. They saw the effort she made, and while not everyone understood her journey, some respected it. She realized she wasn't invisible anymore. Her story was quietly inspiring others, even if she didn't set out for it to be. One afternoon, while waiting outside a classroom, a fellow student approached her. With a soft smile, they said, "I don't know how you do it, but you give me motivation. Whenever I feel like giving up, I think of you." Those words struck her deeply. She had spent so long thinking she was stumbling through chaos, but in someone else's eyes, she was a sign of strength. That moment reminded her that resilience doesn't just carry you forward, it can lift others too. Her professors also began to notice her differently. The same professor who once doubted her now acknowledged her effort. After she turned in a strong paper, he paused at her desk and quietly said, "Well done. I can see how much work you're putting in." The words were simple, but they meant more than he knew. Recognition of her struggle and her persistence gave her another push of energy to keep going. But it wasn't just about recognition, it was about change within herself. She started to feel a quiet confidence growing. She no longer walked across campus with her head down, afraid of judgment. Instead, she walked with her baby at her side and her head held high. She had stopped trying to hide her reality. This was her life. Motherhood and college blended into one. She had chosen it, she was surviving it, and she was proud of it. Of course, there were still hard days when the exhaustion was heavier than ever, when she felt like the world was stacked against her. There were times when the baby got sick and she had to miss class, times when deadlines piled up and she wondered how she would ever catch up. But each time she refused to let it break her. She reminded herself that setbacks weren't endings, they were just pauses. She had already come through so much. What was one more challenge? To help herself, she began seeking out resources beyond campus. She found a local support group for young mothers, women who shared stories of raising children while chasing goals. Listening to their struggles and triumphs gave her strength. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, that there were others carrying similar burdens and still moving forward. Those connections became like lifelines, small reminders that survival was possible and success was too. The baby also became a source of joy that balanced out the stress. Watching little milestones, the first smile, the first laugh, the first time those tiny hands grabbed at her face, filled her with happiness that words couldn't capture. In those moments, she felt everything was worth it. No grade, no recognition, no achievement could match the warmth she felt when her baby rested peacefully in her arms. That love became the anchor holding her steady. As the semester reached its midpoint, she noticed that she was stronger than before. Her grades, once shaky, had improved. She wasn't at the top of the class, but she was steady, consistent, and learning to manage. She had also gained something more important than grades, confidence in her ability to adapt. The fear that once lived in her heart, whispering that she wasn't enough, had grown quieter. In its place was determination, louder and clearer than ever. Her story began spreading further, not because she told it, but because people couldn't help but notice her presence. A young mother carrying a baby through campus while juggling books and assignments wasn't something you saw every day. Whispers turned into admiration, and soon professors and classmates alike began to use her as an example when speaking of resilience and perseverance. She didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. Despite the recognition, she never let herself become complacent. She knew the road ahead was still long, graduation was still far away, and there would be many more nights of struggle before that day came. But she had shifted her mindset. She no longer thought of herself as just surviving. She was building, step by step, toward something lasting. Late at night, when the baby was asleep, she often sat quietly and reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the girl who once doubted if she could make it at all, the girl who cried on the couch and thought about quitting. That girl was still inside her, but she had grown into someone stronger, someone who had learned how to stand even when the ground shook beneath her. She realized she was no longer just pushing for a degree. She was teaching her child through her actions what resilience looked like in real life. She began to dream bigger. She thought about what kind of career she wanted after graduation, what kind of home she wanted to provide for her child, what kind of role model she wanted to become. These dreams no longer felt impossible. They felt distant, yes, but reachable. She could see the path forming, even if it was still filled with obstacles. For the first time, she believed fully in her ability to get there. Through all of this, she never forgot the weight of her struggles. They were real, heavy, and constant. But instead of being chains that held her down, they became the very tools that shaped her into who she was becoming. She didn't want an easy story. She wanted a true story, one she could tell her child with honesty. She wanted to say, "It was hard, it nearly broke me, but I made it through. And so can you." As the semester drew closer to its end, she knew more challenges awaited. But she also knew she had something unshakable within her now. She had learned that strength isn't loud or glamorous, it's quiet, steady, and relentless. It's choosing to show up again and again, even when everything inside you wants to stop. That's what she was doing. That's who she was becoming. And that realization gave her all the courage she needed to face what was still ahead. The final stretch of her college journey arrived faster than she expected, yet it felt like she had been climbing this mountain forever. The semesters had blurred together into a long chain of sleepless nights, heavy books, baby bottles, and countless sacrifices. But now, as graduation drew closer, everything she had endured began to feel like it was leading to this moment. The thought of it filled her with both excitement and fear. She had carried herself this far, but she still worried about stumbling before reaching the finish line. Her child was growing, walking now, with curious eyes that seemed to notice everything. Those little steps and bright smiles became the fuel she needed when she felt too tired to keep going. She often caught herself staring at her child, whispering promises that soon, very soon, life would be different. She would finally be able to give more, not less. She would no longer have to choose between homework and lullabies. She wanted her child to know that all the time she pushed through exhaustion, all the nights she cried quietly while working on essays, were done out of love. As her final year unfolded, the challenges didn't disappear. They just changed shape. The workload was heavier than ever, with senior projects, final exams, and preparation for life after college. Money remained tight, and every bill felt like another mountain to climb. But by now, she had learned how to keep going even with fear and uncertainty pressing down on her. She had faced too much to turn back now. She began reaching out for opportunities, applying for internships and jobs, sending out resumes late at night while her child slept. Each application carried the hope of a brighter tomorrow. Some rejections came quickly, filling her with doubt, but she kept applying. She reminded herself that closed doors didn't erase the open ones waiting ahead. She had survived too much to let disappointment stop her now. Graduation day became her vision. She pictured it in her mind whenever the weight of everything threatened to crush her. She imagined herself in a black gown, walking across the stage, her child watching from the crowd or even in her arms. She imagined the cheers, the tears, and the moment she would finally hold her diploma. That picture wasn't just a dream, it was her compass, guiding her through the hardest days. One of those hard days came when her child fell ill just before finals week. Long nights returned, filled with fever checks, comforting whispers, and little sleep. She had tests to study for, papers to write, but her child came first. She sat by the bed, holding a tiny hand in hers, humming softly, even as her own eyelids grew heavy. The next morning, she dragged herself to class, unprepared but unwilling to miss it. She stumbled through her exam, her mind foggy, her body exhausted, but she didn't give up. Somehow she made it through. Moments like that defined her journey. Not perfection, not straight A's, but perseverance. She didn't always shine, but she always showed up. And over time, she realized that showing up again and again was its own kind of success. When graduation week finally arrived, she felt waves of emotions she could barely put into words. Relief, joy, pride, and even disbelief. The morning of the ceremony, she dressed carefully, helping her child into little clothes that matched the occasion. She looked in the mirror and saw not just a student, not just a mother, but a woman who had fought through storms and was still standing. She held her child close, whispering, "We did it." Walking onto campus that day felt surreal. The same path she had walked while carrying the heavy weight of judgment, exhaustion, and fear now felt different. She walked with her head high, her child holding her hand, both of them ready to step into the next chapter. As she entered the auditorium filled with cheering families and proud graduates, her heart pounded with a mix of nerves and pride. When her name was finally called, time seemed to slow. She stood, lifted her child into her arms, and began walking across the stage. The lights above were bright, the sound of applause filled the air, and in that moment every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night felt worth it. She held her diploma tightly, her child resting against her shoulder, and the crowd erupted with cheers. Some clapped simply out of respect, but many stood, touched by the sight of a young mother who refused to let go of her dream. Tears blurred her vision as she stepped down from the stage. It wasn't just her victory, it was theirs. Her child may have been too young to understand, but one day they would know. They would know their mother had faced endless doubts, loneliness, and hardship, yet still walked proudly into her future. After the ceremony, people she had never spoken to before approached her. Strangers congratulated her, telling her she was an inspiration. Professors who once doubted her now praised her resilience. Friends hugged her tightly, whispering how proud they were. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly believe it. Her story mattered not just to her and her child, but to others too. She had shown what was possible when love and determination lead the way. That evening, back in her apartment, she set the diploma on the table. The baby toys were still scattered on the floor. The sink was still filled with dishes, and life was far from easy. But the diploma stood as proof that she had turned struggle into strength. She smiled, holding her child close, and whispered again, "This is only the beginning." She knew challenges would continue. Raising a child was a lifelong journey, and building a career after college would take time and effort. But now she had proof that she could endure, that she could overcome, and that she could build a future worth fighting for. She no longer doubted herself the way she once had. She had faced her lowest moments and still risen, and that truth could never be taken away. From that day forward, whenever she felt overwhelmed, she looked at the framed diploma on the wall. It wasn't just paper. It was a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and love. It told the story of a mother who carried her child, literally and figuratively, across the finish line. It reminded her that her journey wasn't defined by ease, but by courage. Her child would grow up seeing that diploma, asking about it one day. And when that time came, she would share the story, every struggle, every tear, and every triumph. She would say, "We did this together. You gave me strength when I didn't have it. You were the reason I kept going. And now everything I do is for you." Her journey through college with a baby in her arms had been far from ordinary. It had been messy, difficult, and often painful, but it was also beautiful, powerful, and filled with lessons that would last a lifetime. She didn't just finish college, she redefined what strength meant. And as she held her child that night, both of them drifting to sleep in the small apartment that had seen their struggles, she felt peace for the first time in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had built a foundation strong enough to carry them both. And no matter what came next, she knew they would face it together, with the same resilience that had carried them through college. Because the greatest lesson she had learned wasn't from a textbook, it was from life itself. And that lesson was simple. Never stop moving forward, no matter how heavy the load. Love and persistence could carry you farther than anyone believed possible.